evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Assyrianism class, number 12, on William Daniel and Naum Faiq. Today, we're going to talk about these two very important persons who helped to carry Assyrianism forward early part of the century, and especially in the case of Naum Faiq, and then later with William Daniel until his death in 1988. A note on the sources about Naum Faiq, who is a very important critical thinker and poet, nationalist among the Assyrians. Um, the primary source is, of course, his magazines, his periodicals, where his thoughts are, in addition to some of the books that he published in the various languages. But secondary sources are Abu Zaytun's Naum Faiq and the Assyrian Awakening, the book Naum Faiq in Arabic, and Nahda al-Syriani al-Ashuriya, the Assyrian Awakening, Thomas Bet Abdullah, editor and publisher of Naum Faiq, Palak, there's another name, a pioneer journalist, writer, poet, and leader of a national awakening. A reference to, in various sources, to Adam Becker's revival and awakening, the story of Assyrian nationalism, according to Adam Becker in his book published by the University of Chicago Press. Notice up to hostages in the homeland, orphans in the diaspora, identity discourses among the Assyrian/Syriac elites in the European diaspora, a very interesting book published on the history of the Assyrian nationalist movement and situation from World War I on. Robert Isaf's article, Awakening or Watchfulness, Naum Faiq and Syriac Language Poetry at the Fall of the Ottoman Empire, in the book In Arabic and Its Alternatives, Religious Minorities and Their Languages in the Emerging Nation States of the Middle East. And then George Kiras's various works and entries on Naum Faiq and on the history of Syriacs in the United States. So who was Naum Faiq? What was he about? He was born Naum Ilyas Yaqub Faiq in 1868 in Diyarbakir, which was an important Assyrian city, also known as Amid in the Eastern dialect, or Omid in the Western, in Ottoman Empire. Later adopted the name Naum Faiq, and that's what we know him as. He's described as a nationalist, writer, and teacher by various writers. He was a poet, expressed his nationalistic thinking in poetry. He studied in local schools and then taught from 1888 to 1912 at various community schools, mostly in Diyarbakir, but also other locations within the Ottoman Empire prior to the First World War. He was ordained a deacon by Maragnatius Butros and was always respectful to church hierarchy, although he disagreed with them at times, with the hierarchy of the Syriac Orthodox Church. He's known for his literary contributions, most prominently his poetry, his articles, his essays, to awaken or reawaken Assyrianism. He worked as a teacher, which allowed him to influence many young Assyrians. He founded newspapers and magazines, including Beth Nahran, which became an important platform for promoting Assyrian culture, language, and history. He witnessed horrific massacres of Assyrians and Armenians in Diyarbakir in 1895, but did not suffer himself because he left prior to that in 1915. So he didn't see the Assyrian genocide in full swing. In 1908, he established in Diyarbakir the Jam'iyat al-Intibah, known as the Syriac Irutho. Shortly thereafter, newspaper Kaukab Medenha or Kikhwit Medenha. 1910, it was published in Syriac and Gershoni Arabic and mostly Gershoni Turkish, which means Assyrian alphabet, but the language is either Arabic or Turkish, which was a very common theme among Assyrians in Diyarbakir. In 1912, he fled to the United States, where he continued his activism in the Assyrian diaspora. A few very important of his publications are Beth Nahren, as we said, and Kawkab Madanha or Kikhwet Madanha, and Khuyada or Huyodo from 1921 on, and then the reissuing of Beth Nahren. Originally, it was published from 1916 to 1921, and then it was reissued in 1922 until the year of his death in 1930. He also wrote a collection of national anthems in Surith or in Suryoyo, and also in Turkish and Arabic in 1908. He was one of the first to do so, in conjunction, of course, with the Assyrian nationalist movement in Urmia, which was taking place around the same time prior to the First World War, with people like Benjamin Arsanis, Freydun Aturaya, and others. He wrote a Syriac reader, and this is a theme that keeps popping up. He was placed a great deal of importance on the Assyrian or Syriac language, and for our people to know it. Remember the environment in which he developed and grew in southeastern, what became later southeastern Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. Many Assyrians did not know how to read and write and even speak at times their own language, and spoke rather Turkish or at times even Armenian. He wrote other books, but what's relevant here in this lecture is his influence on Assyrianism. But he had a wide range of interests and knew a number of languages. He was, in every sense of the word, an Assyrian intellectual. Dr. Notis Atto tells us in her seminal book, Hostages in the Homeland, in 1879, Assyrians in Diyarbakir had already established an organization which they called Suryani Qadim, Ancient Suryoyo Brotherhood. This is a very important development at this time, and kind of it's the beginning, really, of the nationalist spark, even before the development of Assyrian nationalism in Urmia. In 1881, these people founded a grammar school for the Assyrian language. Naum Faiq became the symbol of early, what she describes as Umthanayutho or Umtanayuta, or Assyrian nationalism or Assyrianism, and an example to his present day successors. He and other intellectuals founded a literary society, as we said, Intibah or Irutho. His poem on Assyrian nationalism expressed his ideas at the time. Awake, Assyrian, Tabar, or I'tar, Tabar, excuse me, Othuroyo. Now, the goals of the society were to spread these ideas of understanding oneself collectively among the people, to organize the church and reestablish grammar schools in the Assyrian or Syriac language in Der Za'faran Monastery, an important monastery that is over 1,000 years old, dates back to the 4th century. Naum Faiq had the opportunity to dig deep, we are told, in the various literary sources, to admire his language, his culture, his grammar, his history. And up to 1914, the first Assyrian magazine in America was published at the same time. Al-Intibah had something to do with it. In other words, there was communication between these various groups, and it speaks to the importance of their ideas and their interconnectedness altogether. Although some authors critique this and say the development of these nationalisms, for example, among West Assyrians and East Assyrians, had nothing to do with each other. That clearly is rejected by the evidence and by authors like Notice Atto. Between 1910 and 1912, he published the first magazine that, as we referred, the Star of the East, or Kichwet Madancha, or Kaukab Madanha, and the themes of the articles related to various aspects of nationhood or peoplehood, the church, literature, history, language. All of this came together in addition to news. In 1912, he fled to the United States, and the publication of that particular magazine was stopped, or newspaper. But in the United States, in Paterson, New Jersey, he continued his work and began publishing Beth Nahren and later Huyodo. So his work went on until his death in 1930 in the United States. Now, in his writings, there is always this question of, well, what was the word that he used? Was it Syriac? Was it Aramaean? Was it Assyrian? And it's very important to understand, and we've made this point in this series of lectures many times, that the terms being different, all of these terms, Ashuraya, Athuraya, Suryaya, Aramaya, Chaldaya, were not understood in that way in the past. They were understood to be synonyms of each other. And this is exactly what Abu Zaytun has found and has stated in his book on Naum Faiq and the Assyrian Awakening. He tells us that in the writings of Naum Faiq, one encounters all the different designations for people and language. He calls his people Surioye, or Asurioye, Othuroye, Oromoye, and at the time of the peace conference, he uses Othuroye Keldoye. He used these in the languages of his writing. In other words, in the Assyrian or Syriac, in the Turkish, in the Arabic, and so on. All of these words for Naum Faiq were interchangeable. And this, of course, difference between these words, etymological or otherwise, became weaponized later. And we are told by Thomas Bet Abdullah, the editor and publisher of his works, that shortly after his death in the United States in 1930, after many of his poems and songs were changed and falsified, Othoroyo was changed to Suryoyo. The division of that we see today with different appellations like Othoroyo, Suryoyo, Oromoyo, and Kildoyo is a non-issue for Palak or Faiq. In fact, he uses all of the above terms without any real distinction. In English, he advocated the use of the word Assyrian for various reasons. One of them being, of course, his understanding of history, but another being the practicality of the word. Syriac or Suraya or Syrian, as used in English, came to mean something different. And we are, and this is this idea of the non-issue of these words being different is also confirmed by writer Robert Isaf, who tells us it should be quickly noted that at this point, that although there was a backlash later in later generations, and even among poets and writing in the classical Syriac against Assyrianism of this sort, or the expressed belief that the Syriac churches were unified by an ethnic Assyrian heritage, in Faiq's own time, there was no controversy associated with that claim, no violent controversy associated with that claim. What does that mean? That means it was a non-issue. There was no issue between these words. The use of the word Assyrian did not come to be disputed until much later, and there were different reasons for it. Now, an important aspect of Naum Faiq's ideas also is connected to his relationship with the religious authorities. And we are told that in Diyarbakir, Naum Faiq was the Dionysian secretary, and he taught the patriarch, being a highly educated intellectual, taught in many languages, taught the patriarch the Turkish language when he served there as archbishop. And according to Zakaria Shakir, who was the secretary of the archbishop and Naum Faiq had talks about religious and secular matters, national identity and identification, and there was certainly no issue of significance as to the terminology between them. This is the who became the head of the Syriac Orthodox Church. Later, we see this changing, of course. The archbishop thought that clergymen ought to deal with religious matters and the laymen should confine themselves to secular matters. Why is this important? This concurred with the ideas of Patriarch Abd Oloho, who was patriarch until 1915, who has visited Sultan Abdul Hamid in 1913 to submit a request for the establishment of lay councils among the Assyrians in accordance with the law, because the Ottoman Empire was transforming. It was becoming like a Western power in that it separated between the religious and the secular. And so this conformed with that idea, but these ideas soon came to an end when Turkish nationalism took over, when the Republic was forming, when the Committee of Union and Progress, or what we come to know as the Young Turks, when they come to power, things change for the Assyrians. And there's a rejection of Assyrian nationalism or Assyrianism among the clergy. Now, in discussions, Abraham Nuro, who was a scholar, a Syriac Orthodox scholar, an Assyrian scholar of the language, in a discussion with the secretary, he is asked about this relationship between Naum Faiq and the patriarch, the archbishop at the time. And Nuro asks, at the time, Naum Faiq expressed his preparedness to serve the cause of the Assyrian movement. Did Patriarch Ilyas not implicitly object to the idea? What's your honest opinion about this? And the secretary says, Patriarch Ilyas did not oppose them, meaning Naum Faiq and others, Assyrian nationalists. Indeed, he supported them, but he warned them, keep out of movements which trespass on Ottoman sensitivities or on Turkish sensitivities, matters such as composing music, your nationalistic songs, movements like those which imitate the Armenians who demand independence. And he tells them, the patriarch tells these young Assyrian nationalists and intellectuals, my sons, we have not yet reached the point in politics the Armenians have. What he's also talking about is the military capabilities. We don't have the support and the financial ability. Be careful of movements which impinge on the sensitivities of the Turkish state. I see the Turkish state through the officials with whom I am in contact. They regard the Armenians with extreme caution and through a finely focused microscope. So do not bring this tight scrutiny to bear on us. So although he was happy with the work being done by Naum Faiq and others as to the cultural realm, he was certainly very cautious when this entered into the political arena, when there were nationalistic songs that refer to a homeland, for example, things that impinged, in his words, on the sensitivities of the Turkish state or of the Ottoman Empire. And later, Patriarch Barsum, who had participated in the Paris Peace Conference, came to this conclusion that giving up on the West was a better policy than associating with the West. And he tells us, in reflecting on his experience with Western powers, because we have to know why some of these leaders concluded that working with Western powers is not going to be beneficial to our people. And this was what divided, say, the thinking of the Syriac Orthodox Church with leaders like, for example, Marishe Shummun of the Church of the East, who took a more aggressive or assertive role as to his nation vis-a-vis the Iraqis and others. The Syriac Orthodox Church under the leadership of Ilyas Shakar and later Marafram Barsoum became very reticent to deal with Western powers and instead found in moderation with Eastern powers, a better policy. He tells us there at the Paris Peace Conference, he's talking about, I revealed all the catastrophes which had befallen my people. He's speaking of the First World War experience. I explained all the suppression and the grisliness in detail, even though I particularly emphasized how our casualties were both bloodthirsty, massacred, our people were massacred and perished from hunger and cold during the war. When I saw that not one of the conference participants shed a tear and felt no compassion for us, I felt as if I had delivered my speech to statues carved from stone. So he tells of getting the cold shoulder from the West, and he sees this as a sign, and he is advising people like Naum Faiq that, look, we're not going to find any solution by associating ourselves with Western powers. In fact, he says the English and the Americans are going to come and go, or the Western powers, the English and the French, I should say, at this point. The Americans come later. The English and the French are going to go, but the Turks will always be here. The Kurds will always be here. So we have to find a way to be able to live with them. And so this is what leads in part to this understanding that the word Assyrian, because it is beginning to be associated with the Church of the East more and with this assertive nationalistic view that leaders like Marishe Shummun take, Marafram Barsoum later in a pamphlet for the Syriac Orthodox says, this Assyrian, in quote marks, name is an English Protestant invention going back to 1900. It was bequeathed to the Nestorians and non-Assyrians in the regions of Mosul, 1919, 1920, for a malicious political purpose. The Syrians, meaning us, have no interest whatsoever in taking to themselves this, now he calls it a strange name, even though he used it before. The sufferings of the Nestorians have endured are a result, they have endured, the sufferings the Nestorians have endured, are a result of their nationalism. And if Jacobites wish to avoid the same fate, they should disassociate themselves from the Assyrian nationalistic activity. And so that last line is what this is all about. It's not really about the argument of the name, it's about associating or disassociating from a people that are being targeted. And we see this concern also with association with others, with Shakar specifically. We are told in an interview that takes place that is recorded by a Turkish historian from a newspaper, Turkish newspaper, Yeni Gün. We are told that a man called Agapotros has claimed to be the Assyrian representative in Lausanne, according to the newspaper reports. What is your opinion? Now, when he says that the Assyrian representative, he's representing all of these people, all of this nation, and the patriarch says, I do not know him. He probably belongs to the Nestorian denomination. Although Agapotros technically had become a member of the Catholic or Chaldean faith, he was loyal to the Assyrian military enterprise led by Mar Binyamin Shummun, then later, of course, Marpolis, and later The Syrian Orthodox love the Turkish parliament's government. Agapotros does not belong to our community. So again, this disassociation. And he is asked again by this reporter, in Mosul, the British are trying to take advantage of the Assyrians. What is your opinion on that? It is not about the Syrian Orthodox in Mosul, disassociation. It is this Nestorian people that the British want to take advantage of. So this desire to disassociate among the clergy was countered or rejected by people like Naum Faiq, who in his newspaper, Hoyodo, which we see to the right here in the 1921 edition, there is clear association with Agapotros, association with this word. In fact, the word there underneath the Hoyodo mark, the union, is the word Author or Assyria, and the picture of Agapotros, whereas the patriarch of the Syriac Orthodox Church wants to disassociate. Naum Faiq and other nationalists in the Syriac Orthodox Church wanted to associate and bring together their people. And in fact, when Surma Khanum, the sister of the assassinated patriarch Mar Binyamin Shumun and the sister of the patriarch Mar Polis Shumun of the Church of the East, and the aunt to patriarch Mar Ishe Shumun came to the United States. She was very honored by members of the Syriac Orthodox Church. And here we see photographic evidence of the same. There was this Assyrian sentiment that was very strong among the members of the Syriac Orthodox Church who migrated from the Ottoman Empire to the United States. And Naum Faiq was one of them. In fact, he reported in his periodical on this meeting. So overall, what were the goals of Naum Faiq? We know that he carried these goals of aim, awakening, and unity of the Assyrian people in their various denominations, their various sects, through the work of journalism, of writing opinions, writing stories, writing poetry. And so a theme that is repeated in the various works of Naum Faiq is the importance of awakening, repeated in poetry, in writing, in various prose. In Kokab Madanho, he is told in 1916, or we are told by Naum Faiq, we are very happy with the inferiority we are in. We are timidly tied up, living in a state of ecstasy, very contented. In other words, let's wake up. We should not be in this inferior position. And in Bith Nahran in 1916, shall we remain in this ignorance and lethargy? And again, in 1917, O Suryoye, stinking in the grave like Lazarus, rise, for Christ cried out, awake. Constant theme of trying to awaken his people to their situation. Awake, and there shall be hope for you. Be diligent as you study the teachings of the first who passed. They shall shine a light for you like the light of daybreak. And this is in his book of anthems written in 1917. So the importance is self-realization, awakening. In 1916, he also tells us in the magazine or in the newspaper Bith Nahran, now let every one of us, of our Assyrian brothers, ask his friend, where are we heading? What do we want in this world? And what plan are we running towards? Ask, where are we going as a people, as a united force? And this he stressed over and over again as he made the point that all of our sects should be united, and importance is stressed as to recovering what is ours, which is our language, our heritage, things that he experienced in Der Za'faran, in the old books and manuscripts that he looked at. So our goal is, he tells us, to serve our motherland, for all the brothers of the Syriani or Assyrian to come together under a single umbrella. These brothers are Nestorians, Chaldeans, Maronites, Catholics, Protestants. I remind these groups that their past, their race, their blood and flesh, their tongue, their motherland are all that of the Syriani or Assyriae. We must work to exalt the name of the Assyrians. And then he tells us in 1916, again in Beth Nahran, if we Assyrians want to exist as a civilized nation and live in our land of Beth Nahran or Mesopotamia, we must be united to establish a national non-religious, to establish national non-religious schools so that we can teach our sons the meaning of Assyrianism. Now, this is a deacon talking, a deacon in the Syriac Orthodox Church. His poetry tells it all, where he stresses this idea of awakening. Awake, son of Assyria, awake and see how the world is enlightened. The chance has flown from us, we're missing it, and time has ebbed swiftly. Awake, son of Assyria, awake. In enlightenment shall we take refuge, to exaltation shall we fly. If we do not awake, we shall face misery. Awake, son of Assyria, awake. So the constant theme of awakening, realizing what is going on and taking part. So other poems are deep imagination, like other Assyrian nationalists, before and after. Someone give me wings that I can fly to Beth Nahran and see my imprisoned Assyrian brothers, wherever they are scattered. Those were in this world suns and moons. He is praising his brothers, he is praising his history, and in their destruction are extinguished lamps and darkened lights. So the theme is going back to our roots, being united, all of us as sects. And the way to do that is to go back to our ancient roots, to lessen our differences that are denominational, and to bring back a pride in our heritage so that we can achieve something, we collectively can achieve something in this world. We are told by one scholarly observer that this poetry illustrates the central role of classical Syriac. So Naum Faiq wants to gain back this language which is being lost in the ever more important self-designated Assyrian identity. This is one of the reasons he stresses this identity is to bring back the things that belong to it, which in the ideas of Naum Faiq is the language. One of them is the language. Not only is the use of classical Syriac as the language of this nationalist poetry important, the poetry itself emphasizes time and again the centrality of the language to the national cause, both as an immaterial inheritance and as a discipline that must be studied diligently in order for individual members of the nation and the nation as a whole to achieve parity with other peoples. We see this theme, by the way, among many Assyrian nationalists, that we too must achieve parity with other nations, other peoples of the earth, and to attain the greatness and glory that in the pseudo-historical imagination of Assyrian nationalists it had in biblical days. By the way, this reference to pseudo-historical means the history as viewed by Assyrianists like Naum Faiq and other supporters. As to his legacy, the scholar Notice Attu tells us that he and others like him, Ashur Yusuf, have continued to play a central role among Assyrian Umfanaya in the diaspora to the present day. And that is absolutely true. We see an image of a Syriac Orthodox priest and other supporters at his gravesite. About 2 decades after his death, the Golden Jubilee, a publication of the Assyrian National School Association, writes of him, he served as advisor to the nation and held the rank of archdeacon in our church. So he loved his people secularly, and he loved his people and admired them religiously. And his legacy is also revered by others like David Perley, who write on their own as to what his philosophy was. And he gives us the example, the analogy of the fingers and the fist, that if we come together, we form a fist. If we could produce an army, he tells us, dedicated to the practice of this principle and consecrated in the doctrine, whose chief exponent was Naum Palak or Faiq. That freedom of conscience in the matter of religious worship and true loyalty to nationalism are ideas not in conflict with one another, just as Naum Faiq had espoused them. We shall be able to build a new emancipated and intellectual Assyrian commonwealth. This is, of course, David Perley, the well-known Assyrian attorney and supporter of Naum Faiq. True that by accident of birth, he tells us, he was a Jacobite. At that time, this term was commonplace. It's no longer a commonplace term now. But in his heart of hearts, Naum was a true Assyrian as well. His loyalty to his church did not interfere with his loyalty to his nation. Such was the philosophy of his nationalism. His whole life was a solemn proclamation of these principles. It was a militant effort to uproot the old and to refashion our new ways, and ultimately to arouse in us a sense of national unity. Always striving to reawaken our people and to have them rise above the divisions that were thought by many of those who advocated Assyrianism to be a debilitating thing, a thing that sets us back. Now, we also want to look at a person on the eastern side of the spectrum, whereas Naum Faiq had developed in the west, Western Assyria, as it were, and then went west into the United States. Another person that came west but was from the east is the great William Daniel, born in 1903 in in Mahabad, Iran, later went to Urmia, and passed away in 1988 in the United States. His primary education was in missionary schools, where he studied the Assyrian language. After the First World War, William Daniel moved to Hamadan and began studying music. He later went to Switzerland and studied the violin, where he became an accomplished violinist. He returned to Iran and after a few years settled in Tehran and contributed to magazines like Gilgamesh, and contributed musically to Assyrian art by developing various or writing various songs for Assyrians, folkloric songs in the framework of classical music. In 1943, he wrote songs for the weekly Assyrian program broadcast on national radio. He organized a choir and received the admiration of people like Rabi Adday al-Khas in Iran. In 1952, the year that Gilgamesh was established in Iran by Adday al-Khas, he came to the United States, to Chicago, and later to San Jose, where he continued to teach and compose music and also write on other matters. He was first and foremost an Assyrian nationalist. He was an Assyrianist, advocated Assyrianism first and foremost, and used all of his talents, like Naum Faiq, in the same way that Naum Faiq used them. He used his music, his poetry, his ideas to support Assyrian nationalism or Assyrianism. We're told at age 11, he was snatched away from the comfort at home and experienced the genocide, where he saw many people dying on the road. Lost his own father and mother at a young age. And his father, he admired a great deal because he served his patients until he himself caught their sickness and passed away. In Tehran, he began writing the Epic of Qatine, which I'll spend a little bit of time today because I feel this is a very important epic tale, a very important creation written by William Daniel. Began writing it in 1946. He also wrote a number of books. He wrote Ramina Patenta for children to make reading Assyrian an important part of a child's life and to make it interesting. Both of these books were published in 1961 by Assyrian Youth and Cultural Society of Tehran. His first book of songs, The Rays of Light, was also published, Zarir al-Bahra. He came to the United States, as we said, in 1952 and settled in Chicago. Later in California, he continued to teach the Assyrian language. He felt this was, like Naum Faiq, a very important thing, a pillar of our very existence. He organized plays and choirs, wrote articles for the Assyrian magazines, and gave lectures at various functions. And he always, unceasingly, entered into social, political, and even religious realms in his advocacy of Assyrianism. He wrote a book entitled The Assyrians of Today, Their Problems and a Solution. And this is a very important book to quote from because it gives us a sense of his ideas, his concerns, his pains, his suffering among the Assyrians, and he suggests a solution. In 1992, his students honored him posthumously by collecting his unpublished poems. And he was buried in San Jose, California, where a small monument lays on his grave. Now, Estaqatina Gabbara, we are told by Dr. Aryan Ishaya, who has studied his works and who is an anthropologist, quote, only William Daniel could take the shreds of an old tale. And that's exactly what Qatina was. It was different parts of old tales that were repeated among Assyrians in various parts where Assyrians lived, particularly in the Hakkari Mountains. Only he could take, Dr. Ishaya tells us, the shreds of an old tale passed on by word of mouth in various homes. And actually, he talks about this himself in an interview where he says, I would ask a person, well, what about this? What about that? He would say, well, I don't know anything more than that. So we are told that only he could take these discontinued tales, these tales that are apart from each other, and put them together in an epic tale which portrays the history of our people with all its tragedies and sorrows, the rise and fall of the national fortune, and its hopes for the future. This epic is not only rich in rhythmic variation of its verses, and that's absolutely right. It is one of the most beautiful works in the Assyrian language, but the verses are also replete with stunning imagery and similes. The allegorical passages make this epic tale a milestone in Assyrian literature. I would second that. To analyze the various aspects of this epic requires a lengthier discourse. Instead, here is a translation, and we're going to use the translations that Aryan Ishaya has given us to get an understanding of what Qatina is about. But we should also know that William Daniel wrote many poems about Assyrian nationalism and Assyrianism, and foremost among them, which had developed its wings separately and is sung by various Assyrians in various versions, is the song Nineveh. And he tells us in this song, this, of course, a translation, Let me upon your earth or upon your bosom fall, Nineveh, queen of all creation. Perchance I shall inhale from your soil a bit of strength for my tired soul. Let me at your ruins stare and kiss your ancient buildings with passion. There is this desire among the Assyrian nationalists, this romantic desire to link themselves with an imagined past of greatness and glory. And he tells us, tell me, O burned rock, Haqiliya ki paqida in Assyrian, the tale of victory, Metlid Ghalibuta. Perhaps it will awaken me as Skida, a tired soul. Perhaps fear will leave me, and so on and so forth. And then importantly, he tells us that the mother, Yimma Atur, seeks to gather her sons, the sons of the plain and the sons of the mountain. So, this division that must be overcome, the mother is calling all of her sons from various parts of Assyria. Let us unite in one strength and love, so that our link is truthful and strong. Yasura ila sharira khelana. Preach to the nation, my son. Next to old Nineveh, a new Nineveh, build a new Nineveh. And wherever you are tired, come lie upon my earth, gather strength from the mighty. Shkul khela min Gabbarta. Take strength from the great Nineveh or Assyria. So this is a constant reference to the ancient Assyrian past being a very important part of Assyrianism that is advocated by both Naum Faiq and also William Daniel. Now, in the Assyrians of today, Their Problems and a Solution, which was written in Chicago in 1969, he has a great deal to say about the division of the Assyrians according to their religious splits. And these he sees as very derogatory and very have a very bad consequence for the Assyrian people. Yet the Assyrians have experienced that and have awakened, and he is part of this awakening. And he tells us the experience opened our eyes. We learned to differentiate between the religious fervor and national zeal. Until then, we had identified ourselves by our religious denomination plus a misnomer. He does not like the word Suraye. He likes the word Aturaya. Among the Assyrians and Urmia in particular, this word was more favored among the Assyrianists, you could say, less so among the Western Assyrians who used both interchangeably. But he tells us, but now we have this national awakening, and still we are challenged by the church, but now we have the nationalist awakening. And he says the names of famous Assyrian nationalists such as Freydun Aturaya, Binyamin Arsana, Shlimun of Salamas, Yusuf Malik within the Chaldean church. And he also says later Ashar Yusuf, Naum Faiq, Dr. A.K. Yusuf, David Perley, and so on. Added to what he calls the list of torchbearers. All of these are bearing the torch for Assyrian nationalism. Why? Because he tells us all of these people must be remembered, and he criticizes the Assyrian nation as having no center that we are all trying to create as advocates of Assyrianism. He tells us that a nation that has no home, no recognized head, and no reliable social system will not be in a position to take an inventory of its assets and much less utilize them. Geniuses will be born and live in the very midst of the people without the least awareness of their existence. So the good men and women will come and go, and we will not know it because we have no organized system that an Assyrianism can build. Now, this Assyrianism was advocated for William Daniel through his poetry and through his writings and through his suggestions and through his speeches but very prominently and very powerfully through his writing, which he started in 1946, Qatina Gambara. This tale, this epic tale, a very important tale, again, based on an Assyrian oral tale that was passed for generations, is reworked. His creation is a creative reworking of this old tale. There are historic symbols used, one could say anachronistic, such as Gilgamesh, for example, and Marduk, and other expressions of the ancient Assyrian past. It's a tale of a young hero who is born to a widow, who has Christian ethics, loves his people, is willing to sacrifice himself, has physical strength, but also is imbued with mercy. He is ethical and seeks to bring harmony and peace to his family and people. He goes to a dangerous journey to fight the evil of Shidda. He triumphs over through strength and determination. And I'm going to say, before I say that this is one of the most eloquent, if not the most eloquent, Assyrian epic tale in the modern language, that what we see in Qatine, and some of the lines bear this out that we have translated, is a Christian hero, an Assyrian Christian hero, much like Christ, whereas we see in Gilgamesh certainly strength and wisdom and determination and power. There is a desire for immortality. In Qatine, we see the same desires, but much more concern for self-sacrifice for the overall goal of the people, for the well-being of the people. And these are all being upheld through a certain type of ethic that one cannot deny has been influenced by Christianity among the Assyrians, caring for others, being respectful of the weak, self-sacrifice, most of all. So here are some lines from Qatina that I'd like to quote to give you an idea, although it is, I will say this over and over again, it is unfair because one should read it in the beautiful language that it is written by William Daniel. I hope in the future there can be more striving for greater translations than we have now. He is told in this passage, to get an idea of the tale, by a widow whose sons have been taken by Shidda. Shidda is the antagonist. Shidda is the monster that is persecuting these people that Qatina goes to save. She is a symbol of persecution of the Assyrian people. He, of course, is the savior of the Assyrian people. He is a strong figure, physically strong, but also strong mentally, and he refuses to back down. But he is told, similarly in Gilgamesh, when Gilgamesh, after his journey, is tired and he is encountered by Siduri, the innkeeper, he is told, why are you searching for immortality? Go back and enjoy your life, and so on and so forth. He is, of course, determined to pursue his journey until he finds immortality. Here, the widow tells Qatina, retreat from this path, Qatina. Great is the power of the foe, of Shidda, the person you want, the monster you are seeking to oppose. Let some years pass by until you grow in power. On your face, that of a lad, there's no trace of a beard yet. The loss would be immeasurable. If this valiant stature is cut down, innumerable are the brave, and if this valiant stature is cut down, the loss would be immeasurable, excuse me, if this valiant stature is cut down, innumerable are the brave and valiant ones who died on the black altar of Shidda, the cruel altar of Shidda. So go back, because many have come, but no one has returned from this battle. Of course, he does not waver. Like Gilgamesh, he is on a mission. He tells her, do not fear, mother. Do not look at my age. Could be I'm not a famous brave, but it has never happened that in the face of a challenge, Qatina should step back. Listen to this promise that I make in the memory of my dead father. The last day of Shidda is at hand. He is determined to fight Shidda. He is determined to achieve victory, not only for himself, but for others. And here we see a few lines that are very important for understanding that this tale is a nationalistic one as well, and it brings ancient Assyrian history to bear in this epic. Before the sun sets, before the moon rises, you'll remember your sons in your arms. Qatlina says, our men and maidens Shidda has stolen from us. Their lives are entombed in the mountain cliffs. That's where they are. They are entombed by Shidda. If Shamiram could hear in Shamiram Shamyawa, bitterly she would weep for her kids, captive in their own land. This, of course, speaks not only to the immediate battle here between Qatina and Shidda, but also to the Assyrian struggle. If Shamiram could hear bitterly would she weep for her kids, captives in their own land. Rage is swelling in my chest, Qatina says. It inflames my body, it burns me like a fire ablaze. If I do not put an end to Shidda, then it is best to lie down and die, as I would not be the son of Gilgamesh, the Ninevite. So again, the historical themes, references to the ancient Assyrian past. Now, in the end, of course, this is a 3-volume book of over 6,000 poems written by William Daniel. In the end, Qatina triumphs, and the story is told by others in this tale. And it is a very important tale for nationalists, Assyrian nationalists in particular. As beautiful as it is also a lesson of unity and strength in unity and being ethical in dealing with one's people. Now, despite the beauty of this, William Daniel lived, as we are told by Dr. Aryanishaya, most of his life as a lonely, unappreciated artist. That is sadly true. And that is true of so many others who devoted their lives to the Assyrian cause. He was hurt deeply, but never wavered in his love for his people. His lifelong goal was to serve and uplift his people. Edward Odishu tells us in a commemoration of William Daniel while he was alive in Chicago in the 1980s. He has studied much, spoken little, but written much. He is our Shakespeare. Now, he loved his people so much that in the following dedication, this should tell us a lot about how much, although he was hurt, he also loved his people. He says, I dedicate this publication to the altar of the glorious nation that was. My tears have been shed for its present predicament. And we certainly see that in the Qatina epic and in the many poems that he wrote and in the music that he composed. The foremost yearning and hope is to return to an age of understanding, educational attainment, and intellectual revitalization. This hope is my only consolation. And so with that, with the image of Qatina, we conclude the story of one of the advocates, one of the pillars of Assyrianism. Along with Naum Faiq, he worked through literature and through music, through his art. Both of these men were varied in their labors and tools, but they worked for a common cause. Both struggled for their unity and against the denominationalism that divided their people. Both made a lasting impact through their various works on their people, and both are buried in the United States of America. Naum Faiq in the East, and William Daniel in the West. And it's interesting to note that whereas Naum Faiq had come from the west of Assyria, now lies in the eastern part of the United States, William Daniel had come from the eastern part of Assyria and lies now in the western part of the United States. Perhaps it is a comment on the oneness of the Assyrian people. Dispersed they are through the world.